On August 29, 2005, a modern American city was submerged in a matter of hours. People chopped down the roofs of their own homes with axes to avoid drowning in their attics. Helicopters rescued elderly people from rooftops 4 days after the disaster began. What happened in New Orleans was not just a natural disaster, it was the worst engineering disaster in the history of the United States, claiming more than 1,500 lives and costing the country at least $125 billion. Hurricane Katrina became one of the deadliest and most destructive hurricanes in American history, but to understand the scale of the tragedy, we need to go back a couple of years. Before the disaster, New Orleans was founded in 1718. Even though King Louis XIV's royal engineer warned against building the city on this site due to the characteristics of the terrain. The city is located in a natural basin between Lake Pontchartrain to the north and the Mississippi River to the south. A 1999 to 2001 study found that 51% of Orleans Parish's urbanized area is at or above sea level, while 49% is below sea level, in some places significantly so. The city had long lived with this risk, but in September 1965, Hurricane Betsy flooded much of New Orleans, causing more than $1 billion in damage and killing dozens of people. In response, Congress passed the Flood Control Act of 1965 and tasked the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with creating a hurricane protection system, the Lake Pontchartrain and Vicinity Hurricane Protection Project. The project was scheduled to take 13 years, but when Katrina struck in 2005, nearly 40 years later, the system was only 60 to 90% complete, and the planned completion date was pushed back to 2015, 40 years for an unfinished project to protect the city from a known threat. Hurricane development. On August 23, 2005, a tropical depression formed over the southeastern Bahamas. By August 24th, it had intensified into Tropical Storm Katrina. On August 25th, at around 6:30 p.m., Katrina struck Florida between Miami and Hollywood as a Category 1 hurricane with winds of up to 80 miles per hour. 2 people died, but no one imagined that this was only the beginning. After crossing Florida, the hurricane weakened to a tropical storm, but then it entered the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, and that's when something incredible began. By 8 p.m. on August 26th, Katrina had intensified into a Category 2 hurricane. By August 27th, it had reached Category 3. After midnight on August 28th, it reached Category 4, and by 7 a.m. that same day, it was a Category 5 hurricane. On August 28th, around 6 p.m., the central pressure in Katrina dropped to 902 millibars. At that time, it was the 4th lowest pressure ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin. The peak wind speed was 175 miles per hour. At 10 a.m. on August 28th, New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin issued the city's first ever mandatory evacuation order. About 80% of the city's population left, but 100,000 people remained. Many simply did not have the means to leave. Disaster. Early in the morning on August 29, 2005, Katrina struck southeastern Louisiana as a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 125 miles per hour. The city did not experience a direct hit. The hurricane passed further east, but that is precisely what created the perfect conditions for disaster. Storm surge in Mississippi reached over 26 feet, nearly 8 meters, in the coastal cities of Gulfport and Biloxi. In some places along the Mississippi coast, the surge reached 28 feet above normal tide levels. This was a storm surge with a recurrence interval of 50 to 500 years, depending on the location. But something else happened in New Orleans. The hurricane caused the Mississippi River to reverse its flow. The water flowed backwards. Waves began to spill over the levees even before the hurricane reached the coast, and then the breaches began. The first deaths were recorded shortly before midnight on August 28th. 3 nursing home patients died during the evacuation in Baton Rouge. That was just the beginning. At around 5 a.m. on August 29th, a 30-foot section of the flood wall on the east side of the Industrial Canal broke and released water. At 5 a.m., an hour before the storm made landfall, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers received a report that the 17th Street Canal levees, the city's largest drainage canal, had breached. During the first 24 hours, 28 levee breaches were recorded. In the following days, more than 50 breaches were recorded. The eastern part of the city began to flood first. By the evening of August 29th, about 20% of the city was underwater. By August 31st, 80% of New Orleans was flooded, with some areas under 15 feet of water. The famous French Quarter and Garden District escaped flooding because these areas are above sea level. People were trapped. Many climbed into attics to escape the rising water. Many residents chopped their way onto roofs with axes and sledgehammers. Mayor Nagin had urged residents in advance to keep such tools in their attics for just such an occasion. Entire neighborhoods turned into a sea of protruding roofs with people sitting on them. Engineering disaster. This was not a natural disaster. It was an engineering disaster. The American Society of Civil Engineers conducted an investigation and concluded that 2/3 of the city's flooding could have been avoided if the levees had held. The failure of New Orleans' regional flood protection system and the ensuing catastrophic flooding of the city represents the most costly engineering failure in U.S. history. Here is what the investigations revealed. There were 7 independent ones. All 7 investigations came to the same conclusion. The main cause of the disaster was inadequate design and construction. The details are simply astonishing. Using sonar, forensic experts showed that at one point in the 17th Street Canal breach, the steel piles went only 10 feet below sea level, 7 feet less than the Corps of Engineers claimed. Imagine an organization saying one thing, but their own drawings showing another. In June 2006, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers acknowledged that incorrect design specifications, unfinished sections, and poor construction of the levee segments contributed to the damage caused to New Orleans. The Orleans Avenue Canal, located between 17th Street Canal and London Avenue Canal and designed to the same standards, held up thanks to the presence of an accidental 100-foot spillway, a section of the old wall that was significantly lower than the adjacent flood walls. A design error saved this section, while the correctly constructed sections were destroyed. After the disaster. The death toll from Katrina is not known for certain. Reports vary by hundreds of people. According to the National Hurricane Center, 1,836 deaths can be attributed to the hurricane. 1 in Kentucky, 2 each in Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio, 14 in Florida, 238 in Mississippi, and 1,577 in Louisiana. Drowning was the main cause of death, and people over 75 were the most affected age group. The total damage from Katrina is estimated at $125 billion in 2005 prices, although some estimates reach $190 billion. The hurricane left approximately 3 million people without electricity. More than 204,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, and more than 800,000 citizens were displaced. The largest population displacement in the United States since the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. On September 3, 2005, Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff called the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina probably the worst disaster or complex of disasters in the country's history. The government's response was a disaster in itself. FEMA failed to respond to the emergency and took several days to deliver critical supplies, turning the disaster into a full-blown humanitarian crisis. People spent 4 to 5 days in the Superdome and Convention Center without adequate food, water, or medical care in unbearable heat and foul odors. Consequences. Due to the high number of deaths and widespread destruction, the name Katrina was removed from the list of Atlantic hurricane names in April 2006. This name will never again be used for a tropical cyclone in the Atlantic basin, but the most important change was in the understanding of the problem. After some initial skepticism about the cost of recovery, the federal government allocated more than $14 billion to the Army Corps of Engineers to protect the entire city from a hypothetical 100-year storm. The Corps completed the main work by 2012 and the final work by 2018, a remarkably fast turnaround for an agency that typically spends 2 to 3 decades on major capital projects. The new system no longer claims to provide hurricane protection like the previous one, but rather offers risk reduction. This is an important semantic difference that reflects a new understanding of the problem. Conclusion. 20 years later, New Orleans exists, but it is a different city. The system has passed its first tests. New Orleans withstood a 9-foot storm surge from Hurricane Isaac in 2012 and another direct hit from Category 5 Hurricane Ida in 2021. But problems remain. A recent study found that decades after Katrina, the city's flood walls continue to sink by nearly 2 inches every year. The story of Hurricane Katrina is a story of how engineering hubris, underfunding of critical infrastructure, and political inertia can turn a natural event into a disaster of unimaginable proportions. It is a lesson that safety systems must not only be built, but also properly designed, completed, and maintained.